Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan Sommer in Tel Aviv. I am very pleased to welcome Ambassador Frédéric Journès to the podcast, France's ambassador to Israel. And I am just as pleased to be joined by Haaretz diplomatic correspondent Liza Rozovsky. Ambassador Journès arrived in Israel to begin his time as ambassador in July of 2023. Before that, he served as ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, much quieter and peaceful postings, I'm sure. Although this isn't his first challenging experience, he served as first counselor in Kabul, Afghanistan in 2010 and 2011, and before that had postings in Beirut, Lebanon. He has had other roles throughout his career, but given the current challenges with Iran, it is interesting to note that he has been heavily involved in disarmament and non-proliferation issues, first at the United Nations and later in a senior role at the French Atomic Energy Commission. Our conversation is coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions. At the same time, your subscription supports the cause of a free press that holds the powerful to account in Israel and around the world. I invite you to become a subscriber to Haaretz now. Just go to Haaretz.com and use the code Haaretz10, that's Haaretz with the number 10, for 10% off an annual subscription.
Ambassador, it's great to have you here at Haaretz. Welcome.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you, Liza. Boker tov. I'm very pleased to be with you.
Liza, thanks for joining me. Ambassador Journès, it seems to me that during your time here, since your posting in July 2023, there have been two dramatic developments that have really shifted and affected your role. The first, of course, was October 7th and the Gaza war. You can tell us how that change was for you, as it was a dramatic change for everyone in Israel. And then the election and ascendance to the U.S. presidency of Donald Trump in January of 2025, which changed U.S. policy significantly, I would think. You can tell me if you agree, away from closer cooperation with Europe. Can you talk about those two changes and how they affected France's relationship with Israel and its role in the region? I think without these two developments, there would have been no French-Saudi initiative to recognize Palestine and revive the two-state solution.
Well, Allison, the biggest thing, obviously, for this posting, it's been the war. But, it's not only the war in Gaza and the war in Lebanon, it's actually the war in Israel. You're living in a war-torn country. Part of the territory was evacuated. You receive rockets and missiles. I've counted myself 126 alerts during which I had to go to the Mamad. And one of the things that I remember first explaining to Paris, it was in November, I was telling them, we are not trying to think of an exit strategy of a crisis. We are managing the beginning of a war. And the war is going to go from Gaza to Lebanon to Syria, and it won't stop until Israel has given a blow to Iran, because Israel was basically reshaping its strategic environment, which it did. To answer the second part of your question regarding the arrival of Trump and how it played with the French-Saudi initiative, actually the initiative had started before. What was interested in the way Donald Trump's administration handled it is that basically they let us do. That was my surprise. I remember, I was serving in the United Nations in 2003, just after we clashed with the Americans over Iraq. When the Americans don't like what you're doing, they are crushing your hands and crushing your arms. They didn't. They were démarcheurs, hostile to what we were doing, but at mid-level across embassies in the world. They observed, they said they disagreed, and when you had actually the September vote in the United Nations and the resolution endorsing the plan, what was fascinating is that there were so little votings against. Normally the US rally opposition. They were basically only Israel, the United States, Argentina, Hungary, Paraguay, and a few states in the Pacific who usually vote with the US on anything. And that was it. And countries which are close allies to Israel, India, Singapore, and ourselves, by the way, because we consider ourselves as supporters of Israel, they all voted for the proposal. But what has changed after is that Trump did a move. He took out of the initiative the parts that he was interested in, and that was a big chunk of it, really big one. And he turned it into a peace initiative with the formidable capacities of the United States. And let's be fair, it's been stunning. I remember I was on Kikar HaChatufim, the release of the hostages, the arrival of Air Force One over the skies of Tel Aviv. It was the most stunning media orchestration of a major event I've ever seen. And basically Trump saying the core thing at the Knesset, the war is over. So yes, you're right. Those have been the two things. Leaving the war and now saying that the war is actually over, even if we don't realize it fully.
You said that back in November 2023, you predicted Israel's war with Iran, basically?
Israel had been living in an environment, and that's what I perceived during my introductory meetings in August and September, in an environment which it thought was under control strategically. And October 7, the pogrom, the massacre, and then the attack of all Iran's proxies starting on October 8, made it clear to both your military establishment and your government that actually the situation was unacceptable and that everything had to be changed. And yes, it was clear to me, seeing the way the Israeli defense establishment and your government was handling the situation, they wouldn't stop unless they had handled all those they considered enemies. And there was part of a mix in that, because you had the Iranian proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. You had the sources, Syria, which was a transit for Hezbollah, Iran, who was the core. There was lots of language saying that you have to chop the head, not only the tentacles. And then there was also, on a more political, ideological side, the fight against UNRWA, the criticism of the Red Cross, the criticism of the United Nations, the criticism of whoever was in disagreement with Israel. We came later on.
Speaking of that conflict, the UN initiative has been called by Netanyahu many, many, many times a prize to Hamas for October 7th. Basically, ideologically, Trump has backed up that idea, even though you seem to be drawing a direct line between your initiative and the 20-point plan. What's your basic argument for the fact that this is not handing a prize to Hamas, to the other countries who went on the offensive against Israel? Having this result in an international push for a Palestinian state is basically saying that the tactics of October 7th were successful and did bring results.
I've heard that sentence. This is giving support to Hamas so many times. I remember one of the demonstrations for the immediate release of all the hostages was criticized as giving support to Hamas at a moment where maximum pressure was the motto. When I read the papers that resulted from the French-Saudi initiative, what does it say? It says that the future of Gaza must be without Hamas and that it must be demilitarized. It says that a Palestinian state, when it will emerge, will have to eliminate hate speech, eliminate pay for slay, undergo very deep reform and fight against corruption, and will be a demilitarized state. And that basically political forces in Palestine, in the Palestinian lands, will have to abide by the principles that were into Oslo, basically recognizing Israel. All of that is actually against Hamas. What was different was to say there is a moment where you need to move towards a political component of the solution. We acknowledge from the beginning the right of self-defense of Israel. But our core belief, because we've been facing wars, we've been fighting terror groups and territories, we succeeded sometimes and sometimes we failed. When you fight against a terror group like Hamas, There is, of course, a military component. Israel was under attack. There were rockets falling every day. I remember it. I was there. So you need to weaken the military capabilities of the enemy. Then there is another component, which is going to be police. You need to have an authority that replaces Hamas, that is capable of controlling the population, which today is controlled by this terror group. There is a political dimension. You need to create new leaders, and they have to be credible. And that's a trick. Normally, you want to have puppets. Puppets don't work if you want to eliminate terrorism. You need to have solid leaders, which will be more complicated to handle for Israel, but have a chance to handle the people of Gaza. And then there is economy. You need to rebuild. Those people need to have a life. Because one of the core reasons why Hamas was so prosperous was the poverty of Gaza. And this was a result of 20 years of isolation of the territory. We've seen that everywhere. So that is our approach. It remains so. We've said time and time again, it was not against Israel. It was actually for Israel, to give Israel a perspective of peace, more important than that, of stability and security, but on the long run, instead of endless war.
There was at least one man who would surely not agree with you. This is Benjamin Netanyahu. Actually, an open confrontation started between him and President Macron since the beginning of the French-Saudi initiative. And, I mean, if I put it bluntly, the Israelis in general and the Israeli government in particular just don't want to hear anymore since this moment what France has to say about what's going on here. As we know, President Macron pretty rare offer to visit Israel ahead of the recognition of Palestine at UNGA was declined. So what methods or what leverage does France still have in order to make a difference here on the ground?
Well, you know, I've been living in Israel for 2.5 years, and I've been visiting this country many times before. It is an unbelievable country. Sometimes you're exasperated, sometimes you have a crush for it. One thing that you learn from the Israelis is that they speak their mind, they speak it strongly, and they are very opinionated. So usually I would say the Israelis don't like to listen to opinion of whoever, unless they fully agree. But that's part of the fun. That's part of the fun of being in this country, that you need to talk with people who don't agree and will say it loud and clear. But to answer to you regarding the direct opposition between the Prime Minister and the President, which is very real, even though the President constantly tries to keep a dialogue. There is, and that's part of the war spin, a tendency to say anyone who didn't follow exactly what we wanted is a loser. The truth tends to be a little bit more complicated, because while the Israeli government and my counterparts keep telling me, you have no role anymore, I said, how interesting. Because we've never talked that much with all the Arab leaders. We've never talked that much also with Turkey. We're talking a lot with the Americans, even though it's not simple. So we don't feel at all that we are out of any game. That's not our feeling. It's just that when you have partners, they tend to have opinions of their own. Churchill was saying the same about allies. The answer of some of my best contacts here is to say, we are not partners right now. Okay, you can play on that. Why do I think we do have a role? Listen to what the president said in Abu Dhabi. We are building a second aircraft carrier. And he decided to announce that in Abu Dhabi. What does that mean? France intends to remain a military player in the Indo-Pacific and the Gulf. He mentioned all the missions that our forces have been carrying out since, and I quote his words, the October 7 massacre. Interception of drones and missiles, accompanying ships in Bab el-Mandeb to protect them from the Houthis, evacuating people, having intelligence by military sources all the time. A few weeks ago, I was checking, you have all the wonderful websites like flight trackers, sea trackers, that allow you to look by yourself what's available at sea and in the air in terms of military capabilities. Well, a few weeks ago, those capabilities in the region of Eastern Mediterranean, France was a 2-digit in that capacity. So we are a player there. We have a base in Abu Dhabi. We have defense agreement with Qatar and the Emirates. We still have special forces fighting ISIS in northern Iraq and in Syria. We still have our 700 guys in UNIFIL for the time being. We have a base in Djibouti. And we constantly have forces in Eastern Mediterranean, plus the Greeks like us. So we play there. So at the end, we exist because we exist, period. And we also have one thing for which I believe Israel will always consider us as important. We have exactly the same opinion regarding Iran and its nuclear program. And that's been a constant thing. And I remember one of my key partners saying me that he was in a heated discussion here where a big authority was telling him, why the hell would I speak to the French right now? And he answered, Iran. And the conversation stopped.
But when it comes to Gaza, you don't feel like not only France, but Europe is a third-tier player. Right now, the future of the ceasefire agreement is being worked out in Miami, and you've got the U.S., Egypt, Qatar, Turkey sitting down. Netanyahu is supposed to fly in. Doesn't feel like the European powers on one hand are supposed to support, participate, help fund the reconstruction of Gaza, whatever's going on here, and on the other hand are being shut out of the plan of what's going to happen in phase 2 and in future phases?
To tell you first about what was our thinking regarding the war in Gaza and why it was different from our thinking regarding the operations in Lebanon and the operations in Iran. You won't find a lot of declarations and statements regarding the core of the operations, from the beepers, elimination of Hezbollah ballistic capabilities and its leadership during this fantastic blow that you gave to Hezbollah. Same thing when there was Iran. We were not whining about that.
It's in the news, that Netanyahu is supposed to speak with Trump again about a possible hit of Iran because we are seeing that they are renewing or trying to renew their ballistic capabilities, etc. So do you still think that this June attack war on Iran that was so spectacular was actually a success and not just the start of a long series of mini wars that we don't see how to, get out of?
Yes, I think it has been a major blow to Iran because the key scientists have been eliminated. And a nuclear program, it relies on a limited group of people who have the brain to go through the different stages of understanding the physics of a nuclear weapon, which is a very complicated thing to integrate. In our own program, it's the same. You don't have that many people who understand the whole thing of a device. And then key capabilities. The Natanz plan has been entirely destroyed. Fordo has been extremely severely hit. Isfahan has been hit. However, I think that what is requested following a success like that is to return to a very intrusive verification regime. If you remember well, that is what the Bush #1 administration did in Iraq in 1991 after the first Gulf War. They had a fantastic system of inspectors called ANSCOM who actually dismantled and prevented the rebuild of Iraq's program. And I was strongly advising at that moment, and we had very close ideas with Israel, that this was the right time to actually enter into the discussion of a program to dismantle any possible nuclear dimension of Iran's program.
You mean after the war? After
Yes.
the 12 days
Yes.
war? Okay.
Yes. I was convinced this was the right thing to do. It did not happen, and I regret it. I think it is still time to consider it. Now, regarding the difference of a second attack, if it has to take place right now, we see Iran working on its on its ballistic capabilities. It has a few bottlenecks that are slowing down its capacities. Of course, they try to rebuild. It's Persia. Persia has been around for, 25 centuries. It's a very, very old country, a very old empire. It's one of the most advanced countries intellectually in the region, even though they're stuck with this bad regime. But that, I believe, is the problem of Iran's people. But basically, my strong conviction, and I've been sharing that publicly and with all my counterparts, is that the cards have been redistributed now in the Middle East. The war is over. There may still be battles, but they won't change the new balance of power between the winners, which are Israel, Turkey, Egypt, which is in a far better position than 3 years ago, and of course Saudi Arabia, whose being courted by everybody. And Iran fell off, not the cliff, but the stairs. And it will take time for them to go back to where they were. So the course thing right now would be to devise a security balance or a stability arrangement for this region. And actually, in his farewell letter, Ron Dermer alluded to something like that, which I think is the right thing to do for the region. And I mean, it's not only me, my government thinks it is today possible to work in that direction. And that means considering that those players have to be either partners or competitors, but without direct confrontation with each other, without having factions that they play against each other. It's the moment to create a balance. It is feasible. I'm not sure it's going to happen.
A balance between Israel and Iran?
A balance between the four winners. Recognizing that Turkey, Israel, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia are the inevitable masters of the game.
Qatar?
Qatar and the Emirates are countries that maintain or consolidated themselves. But I would say the unavoidable players are the four I mentioned. The other ones are additional powers playing into the game. That's how you build an architecture. It doesn't have to be NATO. It just has to be a balance of power, a balance of deterrence between actors. They decide where they cooperate. They decide where are the limits of their influence. It's super interesting. As a diplomat, it's a fantastic moment. Yes, the Trump administration actually opened the first possibilities for that. That's the Trump plan. Now it requires consistency, and that's the tricky thing. I hope that will be also on the table in Mar-a-Lago. How do we move away to get into peace? Because what interests Trump and the United States is to stop permanent warfare in this region in order to make business, in order to develop its potential and make money.
You mentioned Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Israel, which are kind of obvious, but also Egypt. Can you explain in what way it emerged as a winner? And the second question, so basically your take is not to attack Iran's ballistic capabilities right now?
I'm not saying that, and I will see what will happen. We have new generators, we have stockpiles of water, food, kerosene, everything.
You're ready.
Yeah. We got ready thinking we had to face Hezbollah. There was a report from Reichman University who described what would be a mass Hezbollah strike. We became a little bit Israeli in the way we think that. We thought, okay, our security is our own business. So we just say to the ministry, we need money, have electric generators, stockpile. We need to be autonomous for 5 days. And then Sahal did Hezbollah, and that went away. So we felt reasonably confident when there was Iran. I feel confident if it happens again. I'm just saying I don't believe it's going to change massively the balance of power. The balance of power is rewritten, and it is to Israel's advantage. About Egypt, remember where Egypt was 3 years ago. It was in a terrible economic situation. It needed money from the IMF. It was in a dire internal crisis, and it looked like a weakened actor. Today, Egypt is unavoidable in the region. Sisi is invited by President Trump. All American leaders are thanking Egypt for the role it played in the Trump deal and the hostage release, because they were the one maneuvering, yes, with Qatar, in order to get the hostage release. They are fundamental for the stabilization. And despite the fact that the Houthis are damaging the incomes from the Suez Canal, Egypt is on its feet. It's one of the key players. We're talking to them all the time. So yes, they are successful, which is great because those are the first 4 countries which bring in credible military capabilities and economic power in that region.
Europe in general and France in particular are the biggest advocates for the Palestinian Authority getting back to Gaza and maybe even getting a real role in Gaza, even before they finalize their reforms or whatever. So 2 questions. First of all, what specific role do you think the PA might have already in the second phase of Trump's plan, if any? And the second question is, how would you respond to the Israeli argument that the PA is corrupt, weak, unpopular, and if a democratic election would be held at the West Bank, Hamas would for sure win it overwhelmingly, even if, okay, maybe formally it wouldn't be called Hamas, and it maybe even would recognize the PLO charter or whatever it is, the condition that is put now, but still, practically it would win. So what do you answer to this?
When I was a young intern as a junior diplomat in the Beirut embassy for France, we had a radio station of Radio France. And some in the Lebanese government didn't like the fact that we got this agreement with Hariri. And the radio was never working. And one day my ambassador was telling our cultural and cooperation attaché, why the hell isn't that radio working? And said, the Lebanese don't understand. They slam it with a truck every 3 days and it doesn't restart. Let's be fair. Yes, the PA is corrupt. Yes, the PA is inefficient. Yes, the PA has many flaws. But the policy of the Israeli government over the last 2 years and a half has not exactly been to give it the best capabilities to restart. Yeah, they were blocking the money all the time. You have the policemen in the West Bank that have received half of their salary of July, and they still keep working. I say, under such a strain of condition, the PA is not doing so bad at the level of its civil servants. The issue that we have is within the leadership, which remains the same for way too long. But the services that they can provide, they exist. They just need not to be strangled. And yes, you have to fight the corruption. Most of all, you have to make them efficient. I agree with the argument of the electoral responsibility and the problem that today Hamas and Islamic Jihad are very popular in the West Bank. But the Palestinian Authority also holds an international legitimacy, also holds vis-à-vis the Palestinian people, and I'm making the difference with the leadership. The legitimacy that it represents the historical PLO, that is the gathering of all movements. And we need to play with whatever we have. And that's better than Hamas. What role can they have? At first, what we are working on is on training of policemen. We're doing it in Jordan. That would be PA policemen. They don't need to be under immediate, constant directorate from Ramallah because they will be local. But you start with that. The big problem, which is strong for this government, and I understand because it's a political and ideological one, is that the situation that prevailed between 2007 and the massacre of October 7 had some part of a comfort. I remember, I believe, Bezalel Smotrich saying that the presence of Hamas in Gaza was actually not playing against the interest of Israel. Why? Because it was divide and rule. It made the perspective of a settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict impossible. So it was basically validating the constant belief of the Prime Minister and his government that the problem could be managed but could not be solved. That's what we believe, and we're not the only one, is actually probably mistaken. We were close to believe it, before October 7. Normalization was taking place, and we thought, okay, the problem is slowly disappearing under the carpet. And it has not disappeared. The problem was actually still there. We just did not want to see it. And we believe that one way or another, there need to be a separation and a separate path for the two people, the Israelis and the Palestinians, with statehood, because this is what they demand. It may take time, but that's what they ask for. And the possibility to have a life of their own. The problem is right now, there is zero trust among the Israeli people. And that's understandable up to October 7. And you have to rebuild it. So we need to start from the things which the Israelis have been telling me. Not only the government, people in the street, my friends. Pay for slay, hate teaching. And you start with that, and then you move on.
But Minister Smotrich is, in the meantime, building a new reality. Just this week, he has proposed, and the Security Cabinet has approved, a proposal to recognize and regulate 19 new settlements in the West Bank.
Yeah, that's unfortunately a policy choice to try to make a solution impossible. What's the result of it? It's to maintain the next generation of young Israelis into the same level of constraint to ensure the security of the state. And to me, it's impressive when I think of the life of young Israelis. I see the children of my friends. Okay, you see a guy who's 24 right now. What was his life in the last 5 years? He had COVID, he had the army, did 2 or 3 tours in Lebanon, and he did time in the West Bank on checkpoints or security missions. Are we going to keep doing that for the next century? That's the trick. I understand, even though I disapprove the ideological project, the cost of that project over Israeli use is absolutely enormous. And most of all, it is an endless cost. I don't see the end of it. And I believe that, well, this country would be more amazing if people could have a more normal life without this permanent warfare. You know, someone told me when I arrived and the war started, this country is never more beautiful than when it is going to war. Well, I disagree with him, and he's a good friend, because I've seen this country for the last 2 months. Come on, I prefer it. It's much nicer.
So you mentioned the PA police entering, but again, if there is no Hamas disarmament, how do you imagine this happening?
You know, on all that, first there was a good statement of Marco Rubio saying that we need to make more explicit the purpose and the mandate of the ISF, the Security Stabilization Force, if we want people to jump in, because right now nobody understands clearly what it will do. What everybody has to understand is that we didn't disagree on the right of self-defense of Israel. We disagreed on the way this war was carried out, unlike the strikes in Lebanon and Iran, because we saw clearly the interference of politics and ideology with military choices. And we've all seen that. We've seen Minister Gallant clashing with the government, with the Prime Minister at some point about the issues. We've seen the Chief of Staff of Tzahal being very reluctant in some of the pushes of his own minister regarding chariots of Gideon, because he thought it was too kinetic, endangering too many of the soldiers for a result he wasn't sure of. So we thought that the management of the war was on some issues politicized and was creating huge damage. And the most obvious was the humanitarian dimension, because the system to distribute food was changed every 5 months. It was a nightmare. Nothing worked properly. We did foolish things like parachuting food, making this sea jetty that costed 300 million and worked for 5 days, because the simple solution of just massively flooding Gaza with aid was blocked for political reasons, because people were thinking, we're not going to give them food if the hostages are starving. It's emotionally valid, but it's militarily and politically mistaken. So that's why Europe was so critical. It's not our key security interest. It's not our problem. Lebanon is more of our interest, even though it's not a problem. Iran is our problem. So that's the difference, of involvement. If Israel wants that thing in Gaza to be funded, because it's going to cost hundreds of billions, let's get real, you need to have Saudi money, Emirati money, EU money. They need to be convinced that it is in their interest. And Trump did a huge change. 1 year ago, the Arab countries with whom we were talking in the Gulf were absolutely not interested into putting a penny into Gaza. And right now they're interested, and they're willing to do so. So we need to capitalize on that. But they come with demands. And unlike what I hear too often in Israel, the demands of the Saudi regarding Palestinian statehood are extremely solid. It's not one line of wording in a statement. No. They are way more serious than that, and we need to be aware of that. Now, you ask about the disarmament of Hamas. That's a tricky part, but it can work. I told you I was an intern in Lebanon when I was in my late 20s. And at that time, there were militiamen, former militiamen, all of them except Hezbollah had kept, who had been turned into street policemen. You could see them at any crossroad. And I was saying to a Lebanese government member, but that's nonsense. Those militiamen, they're all around Beirut. They can restart the war. And he said, no, we replaced their AK-47 by an old rifle, and we're feeding them hummus 3 times a day. They're getting fat and they're getting older. If you remember, the PA police just dropped their uniform in 2007 and put the Hamas uniform. The truth is, to a large extent, you need to do the same thing the other way around. Give them less dangerous weapons, turn them into street police. That's what Algeria did with the Groupe Islamique, the Armée Islamique du Salut, which was staging a civil war in Algeria for 10 years. they reinserted them. You're not going to eliminate all of those people. So you basically need to find them a job in local police, find them a little job in society, de-radicalize them to the extent possible, and basically reinsert. You got rid of the leadership. There are almost no more leaders. But that has to be this more police work, is down to the ground. It's full of compromise, not heroic. But that's how you treat the small weapons. The heavy weaponry, and Israel included RPGs, that I agree, they have to be recovered. The Egyptians are working like crazy on that. That's what we know from them and from the Americans. I don't know all the tricks of how you do that. It's patient, not glorious, but it can work.
So President Macron, I think he announced the two conferences months ago, notably at the end of August. He said that until the end of the year, two conferences to basically help and fund and support Lebanon would take place until the end of the year. It didn't happen. There were doubts, I would say, right, that actually the Lebanese government and the Lebanese army can deliver. Now we see that they announced that until the end of the year they will complete the disarmament of Hezbollah south of the Litani. How do you see in general the progress in Lebanon? And what should we expect from this conference that now is supposed to take place in February? Is France actually ready to commit significant funds to help the Lebanese army? Because for now, from what I understand, Qatar is paying a big share of their salaries. Or does it count that the Saudis would pay, or maybe other Gulf nations? How does it work?
I would say we have right now in Lebanon the government that we wished for over the last 5 years. We have an army which is playing a credible role, but nothing is going fast enough. And a few days ago, Jean-Yves Le Drian is the special envoy, or very respected previous foreign minister and defense minister. He just said bluntly to the Lebanese, unless you move faster, the dollars are going to go to Syria. And that's the blunt truth. Lebanon goes back a little bit to its old flows of not being able to take the necessary measures to move forward. For instance, they still have to make a bank reform, which is blocking IMF support. And they're not doing it. The ILAF, they are afraid of going to civil war, and so they were reluctant to enter private houses when making research for weapons in the south. That's not reasonable to be so shy unless they do something more serious. The same thing will happen again. Israel will take charge and dismantle the capacities by itself. So they need to accelerate their effort. And the reason why the conferences didn't take place is that the conditions for donors to put money into that were not present. So we work a lot with the Americans, with Morgan Ortagus. We work with the Lebanese. We work with other Saudis. But yes, it has to accelerate. And that's an issue. After, if those conditions are created, France will be on board. The key issue is basically to make it possible for a poor Lebanese young man to work in the LAF rather than to work into Hezbollah. He's paid $600 a month working for Hezbollah and $250 a month working in the LAF. You basically need to fund that. After there is the issue, when it's Qatar money, Israel is not happy. I would say we do with the money that we get. We'd be very happy to have monies from others. But that's basically where we are right now. That's the equation. Lebanon still has a chance. I'm worried that there might be another Israeli intervention at some point if disarmament of Hezbollah doesn't go fast enough. We will see. I'm crossing my fingers on that one.
So I still didn't understand. Will there be French money inside, or is it only...
Yes, but not alone. We're not going to fund alone if the Lebanese haven't come with something solid enough, credible enough to attract other long-term donors. We can't fix Lebanon on our own.
What about this economic zone, the American plan? It's supported very much by Israel as well.
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
We've been talking about it with the Israelis. Personally, I think it's a good idea because that's one of the key issues in the south. You would be surprised. The south of Lebanon is an extremely poor area because it has been a war theater for a very long time, because everybody with a talent has moved out. Many of the smart Shia boys from southern Lebanon, they opened a shop in Africa, and after they're funding Hezbollah, etc. But So it's a very depleted territory. So we need to do something to revive the economy of that region. I believe it's consistent with what I said to you before regarding the salary of a Hezbollah fighter versus a LAF soldier. Yes, we won't work viable future without addressing the development of the South. It's been a subject of conversation with Israel. I hope we will get further into that.
Ambassador, my friends in France and my many French immigrant friends in Israel wouldn't let me end this interview without talking about anti-Semitism. So taking you back home for a moment, I've had twice on this podcast Rabbi Delphine Vayot. She's spoken movingly on the anti-Semitism crisis in France. She said Jews are feeling it from the left, from the right, and she told me French Jews don't know who their friends are anymore. In the U.S., it seems like anti-Semitism is a generational crisis. If you look at the polls, more and more youth are openly anti-Semitic. How do you see its development, the fight against it in France, the fight for French Jews' security? The Bondi Beach massacre was committed by ISIS-inspired terrorists, and they were responsible for the big disaster in France in 2015, the massacres there. And as you answer the question, if you can talk also about the debate on where to draw the line between legitimate and even harsh criticisms of Israeli policy as it's played out in Gaza and anti-Semitism, what your view is on that.
When I was a young man, I was demonstrating against anti-Semitism. Some of my best friends, the mother of one of my best friends, Anne-Marie Revkolevsky, was organizing those demonstrations. And last time I went in a demo, that must have been 4 years ago, she saw me. We met in front of one of the buildings, Place de la République, and she jumped at my head saying, "You were here when you were 20, you're still with us." I am horrified by what's happening. There was a song from Louis Chédid, is a Lebanese singer in France called Anne Masseran. It was a song to Anne Frank, saying, "I can't believe what's happening. It looks like a nightmare." She came out of her den, the nasty beast. Anne Masseran, j'arrive pas à y croire, c'est comme un cauchemar. My friends are afraid. They don't feel safe. We had a meeting of our staff in the embassy with a psychologist coming from Paris. And we were sharing our experience of living the war, and it came to anti-Semitism in France. And at some point, I asked the expats. Most of us expats are non-Jewish. I said, who among you has hidden to a taxi driver or to a waiter in a restaurant that we were coming from Tel Aviv? And we all raised our hands. And our French Jewish collaborators or local staff said to us, but we've been doing that all our life. And so I'm not going to minimize in any way what's happening. It's terrifying. Where is it originating from? The war in Gaza producing images of destruction and misery all the time has been massively used. There is a huge issue in the radical left which has developed an ideology over several decades, basically identifying capitalism with colonialism and racism and mixing those concepts completely, and that has made Israel the target of what is actually an attempt to revive, I would say, a post-communist vision of anti-capitalism. This has pervaded the universities. And then it has invaded the streets because the extreme left in France is very active in the streets. So right now, I'm not saying anything reassuring. I'm super worried. I just want to share with you what we do. First, we cooperate a lot in terms of intel with Israel, with everybody. So every time we have something, we do it. Second thing we are observing is online radicalization. We learned it from ISIS. So we see young boys and young girls who start to be active on loops in the open web that are pro-Gaza, pro-Palestine, and then suddenly becomes totally anti-Israel and anti-Semitic, and then they disappear because they go to the dark web. And we're trying to follow them. It's a meticulous work. We're extremely active on that. I discussed it with the head of our Director General for Internal Security recently. We have massive deployment over all the premises of Jewish community buildings. It can be kosher supermarkets, synagogues, but community centers. It's more than 15,000 policemen. It's half what we did for the Olympics. We have to figure out. And that has been permanent since October 7. We passed a law against radicalization at university and antisemitism. That was last July. Nobody noticed it. But basically, we are working on a tripod of ideas, which is to prevent, educate, and punish. Maybe it's not enough. We also need, and that might be a difficult thing, for Jewish communities because they've been accustomed to live in discretion. It's a bit like when I was a young gay. You just hide. You don't talk too much. Don't make yourself visible. You'll be quiet. Actually, I understood that making myself visible was a positive thing. It gave me more security and it allowed better understanding. I had disappointment when there were big demonstrations against gay wedding, including from people I loved, including in my own family. But still, I believe that being out and being known for who you are as a good person playing a useful role in society is valid. And somehow our Jewish communities have to explain to the French people, by the way, we're around you and we're amazing. We are nurses, we are doctors, we are cab drivers, we are working in a shop. We are working as a civil servant.
But they don't feel safe going with a kippah on.
True, they don't.
On the street. So
They don't. But I believe, I may be very naive on that there is a part of a movement, not spontaneous, to remember to the French people how the Jewish community is a vibrant part of the Republic. In the same way, before October 7, Israel was becoming the startup nation. It was a gay holiday destination. I remember one of my friends, she's a famous French Israeli DJ, she was telling me, only the tech people and the gays actually love Israel. But said, well, we need to do more. There are more gay people. I checked a statistic recently, the proportion of people in Israel acknowledging that they have a gay or bisexual experience is higher than in San Francisco. And in Tel Aviv, it's more than double Paris. Trust me, it doesn't feel the same. You go to a movie in Israel, you will see a gay couple holding each other. The big difference is that the gay community here, they all have kids, which we don't in France. It's part of the culture. You need to show again to the world that Israel is amazing. The amazing thing with terrorism is you reach a point where you're going to become a suicide bomber. That is, the hatred of somebody else become higher than the love of your own life. That's nonsense. You should never get there. I am living in Israel for 2.5 years now. There are moments I'm mad. And there are moments I have a crush for the country. 3 days ago, we were going by chance to Niroz Kibbutz. I was with our ambassador for the fight against antisemitism, Isabel Rom. And I said, okay, your last day I bring you to the Nova Festival area. You have to go there. So we go there. I explained to her where was the main scene, was the ambulance. I show her the plaques for the 2 French victims, Orion Hernandez and Elia Toledano. And then I thought, okay, we have time. Let's try to go to Niroz, because that's the kibbutz where you had the most French people. So we arrive unannounced. We are in normal clothes, and we chat with the soldier at the gate, and she tells us, okay, well, normally we shouldn't, but we let you come in with the guy in charge, the young officer in charge of the security. Okay, one of those heroes. And at that moment, Romain, our press officer, told me, God, there really are people who can make you love this country. Someone so positive. And he shows you, you go through the tragic. You pass in front of the house of the Bibas family. And they're like, wow. And then you see the kibbutzim and their life, their hopes for this country. There is so much good things to say about Israel. It's time to go back to it.
I think I'm going to seize on that optimistic note to wrap up on. It's really been a fascinating conversation. Ambassador, thank you so much for coming and joining us, giving us so much of your time. Thank you, Liza, for dropping into the podcast and joining me.
Thank you, both of you.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Ambassador Frédéric Journès, to diplomatic correspondent Liza Rozovsky, and to producer and editor Adi Shacham. If you'd like to continue to listen to our podcast and make sure you don't miss an episode, please subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave us a 5-star rating if you're so inclined, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Allison Kaplan Sommer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.